Okay, welcome everybody. We're going to get started so we can keep on time for this marathon meeting. I am Jordy Scully. I work for Senator Monique Limón, and Senator Monique Limón and Assemblymember Hart, along with the Natural Resources and the Office of the Governor, have convened this meeting. Thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate everyone out here. I just have a few housekeeping announcements. As the interpreter said, there's interpretation in the back. The bathrooms are out this door down the hall on the right-hand side. Since the state fire marshal is here, I'm going to tell you where the fire exits are. Up here in the front and two in the back as well. Finally, we have some snacks outside and some water. You can bring water in here, but please no food in here. This is a school, so it's school rules. And that is pretty much it. I'm going to announce our elected officials here today. We appreciate everyone for being here. We have a few electeds. I'm sorry if I missed anyone. We have Spencer Brandt from the IVCSD. We have Monica Solorzano, the Vice Mayor of Carpinteria. We have Luz Reyes-Martin from the Goleta City Council. We have Supervisor Laura Capps and Board Chair. We have Supervisor Joan Hartman. We have Supervisor Roy Lee. We have Janet Blevins, Lompoc Unified School District. And we have Robert O'Reilly from Congressman Carbajal's office. And then, of course, we have Senator Monique Limón and Assemblymember Gregg Hart. One more thing, so there's going to be a Q&A portion that will be done with cue cards. So we have our staff, they'll be walking around with cue cards and pens. So if you have a question that you want to submit for the Q&A, please raise your hand or go into the back and get a cue card and then hand it back to our staff. We'll have that Q&A portion. We probably won't get to every single question, but we are going to do our best. And any questions left unanswered, we will have the Natural Resources Agency has agreed to put out an information sheet after. So that is pretty much it. Now I have the honor to introduce my boss, Senator Monique Limón. She was, I'll pause for applause. She was born and raised here in Santa Barbara in Senate District 21. She has a very deep care for the community, the environment, and people I have seen every single day that I work with her. And she is chair of the Natural Resources Committee because of her commitment to the environment and her work on oil. And she has been involved heavily with oil and environmental legislation, among many other legislative priorities in her years serving on the legislature. So now I will introduce Senator Monique Limón.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jordy. I want to thank you all for being here. This is clearly evidence of how important this issue is to our community, and our community has shown up today. So thank you all for being here. Also, an incredible gratitude to start off with to Santa Barbara Unified School District and La Cumbre Junior High School, because, you know, schools are amazing. Schools showed up for us. We had to change the location due to high interest and demand. And the school district, our school, La Cumbre Junior High School, we have incredible staff members here from the school district as well who showed up to make sure that our schools are a community place where we can gather to express ideas and have conversations. So thank you so much to the school district. I also want to thank every single person that is here today. I have been a representative for this area for 8 years and counting at the state level, and this is the first time that I have seen this many state agencies here to address one single issue at the exact same time. And I want every single person to know that what this means, what you are seeing here today, is that the state takes this very seriously and that the state cares. They have been partners to us and continue to be partners. If you ask any of my colleagues whether this is normal to have this many state agencies here at the same time for one issue, they will tell you it's not normal. And so I think it's really important to recognize as we go into a conversation, into a presentation, that them being here is a reflection of how important this issue is to not just the community, but to our state, and how much they care to be here to give this information today. There are not going to be any decisions made today. This is not a place, this isn't a hearing, it's not a formal setting for a decision. This is here to make sure, this is really being convened to ensure that we are all given the same information, that we all have the opportunity to hear the role of state agencies as it relates to this issue, but also to ensure that we're level setting about what each state agency can or can't do. And so we know that we've had websites with public information that have been put up, and sometimes, this is like an added on opportunity for our community to connect. So incredible thank you to, of course, our Secretary for Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, who I've been working with all 8 years in different roles and capacities. So thank you for being here, and to the Natural Resource Agency. And again, Grant, a lot of people have asked, is the governor here? The governor is not here, but the governor has sent a representative who is not on this panel, who is listening, and who's coming straight from the governor's office, which is Grant Mack. So he is here. So I want folks to know that our governor has a representative here. And again, every single state agency who I work with on a regular basis, because not only do they return our calls and help us navigate everyday issues for our district, but they're here in a special way. On May 19th of 2015, nearly 10 years ago, the issue that we're discussing today related to this pipeline was an issue that caused the spill, releasing an estimated 450,000 gallons of crude oil that entered our Santa Barbara Channel. The spill impacted about 150 miles of coastline, with impacts as far south as Manhattan Beach. That spill cost nearly $100 million in cleanup efforts. The spill not only harmed our natural resources, but it also impacted our economy. It temporarily had an impact on the tourism service industry, of course, a lack of access to our natural resources and our fisheries here in this area. And I know that all of us understand how important this is as we consider how we move forward. But we also understand in very deep way that our coastline and our channel has felt the impacts for decades, starting from the 1969 oil spill that happened here. And so we approach these issues in a very serious and significant way to try to determine what our future looks like, what the future of this pipeline looks like, but more importantly, our community. And so I think today, again, everybody showing up here is a reflection of how important this is to our community, to us as state representatives, and to the state as a whole. We have two major priorities for today, which is, as we think about how this moves forward, how do we prioritize the safety of our community and our community at large? That means the people, the environment, the community, the ecosystems, the economy as a whole. And second, how do we ensure that our state agencies that are working with us are working in a way where they are able to share information with us, make that information accessible to all of us on a regular basis. And so those are really our two main goals. Government plays a role as we think of the future, but we all have different roles. Everyone in government has a slightly different role by design to ensure that we keep our community safe. With that, with that in the background, I want to also remind folks that as state legislators, our role is to elevate the issues that are important to our districts. We can't just pick up the phone and tell them what to do as state representatives. Our vehicle to do that is a law. That is the only way that we can direct and provide direction at times, not always direct, but provide directions and guidelines to our state agencies. It is through the legislative process. As such, both, I know Assemblymember Hart and I are looking and are working on bills. Most state laws cannot be applied retroactively. So we are looking at legislation that looks at how we move forward, and that is because that's what we have in the ability to do. And so we're very committed not just to address the present challenges and concerns, but also to think about how we look forward and hope that our state agencies will also be partners with us as we as legislators take it through the legislative process. We know that this has been an issue for our district for a long period of time. This fall, we had 13 state legislators who requested, who sent, an information, a letter to our fire marshal who requested more information on behalf, that more information be made accessible to the public. We requested an environmental review for the pipeline pursuant to CEQA. We also requested to public meetings to hold and invite the public. And I have to say that we, together with all these state agencies, have been able to share more information. The fire marshal has a website that I'm sure he'll talk about with more information to make that information accessible to the public. We have here this public information meeting as a result of, again, the community efforts and legislative efforts. And we are continuing to look at what we can do as it relates to environmental review. But know that multiple state agencies, in particular Fish and Wildlife and the Coastal Commission, also believe that there is more work to do on this front. So we appreciate everyone's effort, in particular, again, the fire marshal who was very quick to, have a state website with additional information just about this. More recently, Assemblymember Hart and I have requested that our Attorney General help us with enforcement issues. We know that violations, violation orders have been issued by 2 state agencies, and so we believe that that enforcement is critical. And so we have requested our Attorney General to be involved in that process as well. More, I think, to come on that front. With all of this being said, again, I want to reiterate how important it is for us to convene to have a conversation about this particular pipeline, to address it in a manner that is transparent, but also reflects the different roles by design that every state agency has, and the complexities of how to be able to get to the outcome that will result in keeping our community safe and hearing the many and diverse voices that are here today. So I want to thank you all for being here, and then welcome Jordy, who is going to welcome our assembly member who has been an incredible leader and champion on this front. Thank you.
Next up, we have our assembly member, Gregg Hart, who has served on the Santa Barbara City Council, the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors, the Coastal Commission, and is now our assembly representative. He's passionate about climate change and oil issues in the district, and he's been a strong advocate for our community throughout. Welcome, Gregg Hart.
Well, it's really a pleasure and honor to be here with all of you in this incredible historic theater. Not too long ago, this theater was pretty run down and tired, And the community came together and invested a lot of private money and resources from the school district to restore it to the spectacular splendor that we all enjoy. And it has become an incredible resource for the community, opportunities like this for public meetings, but to celebrate art and dance and drama. So maybe we'll have a little bit of all of that tonight as well, too. I want to thank all of you for coming here today. This is a rainy day. Santa Barbara, it's hard to get us out of our homes in the rain, so thank you for going and getting through hail and sunshine and rain to be here with us today. I especially want to thank all these amazing folks from the state of California representing all these incredible resource agencies and regulatory agencies, Secretary Crowfoot, Parks Director Quintero, others, and I really want to take a moment to focus on the job that they do, because in this moment politically in our country, public employees are being attacked in Washington, and many of the federal agencies that work hand in hand with the state organizations here are under attack. The APA is being decimated. The Trump administration is firing the meteorologists who work for the National Oceanographic Administration, folks who help us predict storms and weather and protect us. And here in California, we're not doing that. We are doing the opposite. We are investing. Thank you. We believe in science. We believe in the importance of having a rigorous environmental review process. And at the same time, we have the 5th largest economy in the world. It is a false choice. Thank you. In fact, I can go a little bit down the facts. We are the largest manufacturing state in the country. We have the most small businesses in the country. If we were a separate country, we would have the largest GDP per capita of any place in the world. California is an economic powerhouse. And we are doing that with the highest environmental standards in the planet. It is a false choice to say that we have to choose between protecting our environment and growing our economy. And we're proving that in California. And the world is watching us while we're doing it. And so we have a tremendous responsibility to uphold those standards. And the people here, the professional folks who every day look very, very carefully at a wide variety of environmental issues and regulatory matters and apply their personal, professional expertise to those matters deserve our thanks and gratitude. Thank you. This community, sadly, has understood and borne the burden of having major oil spills. Senator Limón mentioned it. Back in 1969, we had the oil spill that devastated this area and really led to national legislation, support from bipartisan, both houses and parties in Washington to create the Environmental Protection Agency, really catapulted the need to balance our environment and our economy in a different way in history. And we had a lot to do with that, unfortunately, as a result of a terrible oil spill. 10 years ago, as Senator Limón also mentioned, we suffered another oil spill. So we have experience here in this community of the tragedies that come from companies that don't operate responsibly. And it is our job to make sure that operations are done responsibly. And in this instance, we have some serious concerns about what's being proposed with the Sable pipeline. We need to keep our community safe, we need to keep our environment safe, and we need to balance the environmental risks that are obviously part of this project. And that's why this meeting is so important, to give an opportunity for you to hear directly from the folks who have this work and this job to protect our environment and to carefully examine this proposal in every way that can to ensure public health and safety and protection from our environment. So I'm really pleased that you're all here. I know you have many questions. I want us to get the chance to get to those as fast as possible so that you can learn how to most effectively participate in this process and to make sure our community's voice is heard in this process. Thanks for being here. Let's get started.
Okay, thank you, Assemblymember. Next, we have Secretary Wade Crowfoot. He is the California Secretary of Natural Resources, and he's in charge of leading the state's effort to conserve California's environmental and natural resources. He was appointed in 2019 and oversees 26 departments, commissions, and conservancies. Not a small job. And he will be giving us some background and context on the offshore pipeline. And we are so grateful that he came here to our community to discuss this issue with us. Please welcome Secretary
Great,
Crowfoot.
thanks. All right, well, thank you, Jordy. So I lead a natural resources agency. We oversee the oil and gas sector, and we're also charged with protecting the coast. So it's logical that I would be emceeing this portion of the meeting because we need to explain just what the state is doing on this topic. I'll tell you, we're here because Senator Limón and Assemblymember Hart told us two things. One is this issue, this proposal, is a big deal in our part of the state. And I have to say, looking out at this room of several hundred people, it's very clear of the intensity of focus. Now, I recognize people are here for different reasons with different positions, but one strong point that we already take is just how important it is that we ourselves in state government focus on this issue, given how important it is to you. So that was point number one. The point number two was, this is complicated. This is a complicated process that people haven't been understanding. They don't really understand the role of the 8 agencies that you'll hear from, and we need to do a better job in state government actually explaining how state government regulates this proposal. And that's what we're going to do here today. Next slide. So big infrastructure is complicated, and a proposal like this has to meet probably dozens of state laws and regulations. And so we're going to spend the next hour plus, hopefully in an understandable, clear, fairly fast-moving way, explaining to you just what laws and regulations this proposal needs to meet, and then how these folks up here are ensuring that that happens. We're going to be breaking down the process. I've asked each of you not to speak like a stereotypical government bureaucrat, so avoid the acronyms, language that we can all understand if we don't do this for a living, and we're going to move our way through this. But the goal is that everybody understands when they leave here today what is happening, both what's happened, what's happening, what's planned to happen, and then ways that you can engage directly in each of these processes. Next slide. Let's go one more slide. All right, so as we've talked about, eight state agencies oversee the different parts of what we call the Santa Ynez unit. So we're talking about 2 pipelines, but we're also talking about other infrastructure, and I'll show you a map in just a moment. Basically, all of these state agencies are in charge of protecting some aspect of public health, safety, and the environment. And it's very clear that the owner-operators of these pipelines and the unit essentially need to meet these specific state laws and rules before any restart of the operations. So really, that's the charge of the folks up here, is not to give a thumbs up or down on the project based on their own opinions or their own experiences, but they have a legal obligation to discharge those laws that our legislators make and the regulations that they spend their career enforcing. Next slide. This is the laundry list of agencies. You have that in a packet. If you've gotten, we'll pass through that. One more. So we wanted to provide just a slide on a map that shows all of the infrastructure. Let's go one more slide if we could. There it is. I'm going to suggest that this slide stay up during our presentations because we'll talk about a lot of aspects of this, and the different departments up here talking regulate different aspects. And so cumulatively, this is known as the Santa Ynez unit. It involves 3 offshore oil platforms that are in federal waters. That blue line in the ocean is a separation between federal waters, 20 miles off the coast, and then the hatched area, which is the ocean closer to the coast. Those are state waters from essentially the beach 3 miles out. And that matters because our State Lands Commission has jurisdiction over those lands. The pipeline that you see in yellow is the offshore pipeline, and our state lands, we'll talk about that. And then that offshore pipeline meets the onshore pipelines, which are known technically as CA 324 and CA 325. The pipeline hits the coast and obviously then goes up it, goes through Gaviota State Park, which is why we have our State Parks Director, and then cuts inland. So it's important to keep in mind this map because different departments have different jurisdictions. And we have already received a ton of questions from many of you when you've registered, and so I've asked everybody here to build in answers to those questions in their presentations, and then we're going to ensure that we have enough time to answer additional questions that are coming up. And then, as Jordy said, any questions we don't get to tonight, we are committed to actually answering in writing on a web page that we've set up. I guess the last point I'd make before we get into this is we have about a 3 or 4 pager that provides information on each of these agencies as well as contact information. So should you have follow-up questions after this meeting, we want to make sure that you can ask those. So we're going to get underway, and first up we are going to invite Cassidy Teufel up from the California Coastal Commission. So Cassidy, you have to, you're going to exhibit good behavior here because there's 8 different departments. So I know you have a lot to share, and if there's anything that doesn't seem readily understandable, I might interrupt you just to ask for points of clarification. So welcome.
All right, is this on? All right, there we go. Thank you, Secretary. And yeah, it's a real honor to follow these distinguished leaders and to be here tonight. And I hope to share some information with you. I have some slides that I'll go through and really just kind of walk through the Coastal Commission's role here, some brief information on who the Coastal Commission is, as well as some of the permit history of the pipeline and the associated Santa Ynez unit. Oil and gas operation, and then I'll walk through the Coastal Commission's recent and pending efforts involving Sable. I want to also note that our Executive Director of the California Coastal Commission, Dr. Kate Huckelbridge, sends her regrets. She would be here, but we have our monthly hearing in Santa Cruz today, and so I'm stepping in for her tonight. So next slide, please. The mission of the Coastal Commission is to protect and enhance California's coast and ocean for present and future generations. We do this through careful planning and regulation of environmentally sustainable development that embraces the use of best available science and strong public participation, education, and interagency coordination. The Commission is an independent state agency composed of a staff and 12 voting members, appointed equally 4 each by the Governor, the Senate Rules Committee, and the Speaker of the Assembly. 6 of the voting commissioners are locally elected officials from all coastal regions of California, including Santa Barbara City Councilwoman Megan Harmon, and 6 are appointed from the public at large. The Commission also has 3 non-voting members representing the California Natural Resources Agency, Caltrans, and the State Lands Commission. The Commission's authority comes from the California Coastal Act, a law passed following a widely supported voter initiative in 1972 that outlined its scope and approved the creation of the Commission. The Coastal Act focuses on the protection of a broad suite of coastal resources, including the ocean, sensitive terrestrial habitat and wildlife areas, water quality, and public access to beaches. It does this through a regulatory and permitting process that applies within a mapped coastal zone. Along the Gaviota coast that you all are familiar with, the coastal zone runs roughly parallel to Highway 101 and is typically about a half-mile inland from the highway. The Sable pipeline is within the coastal zone until roughly the intersection of Highways 101 and 1. The Coastal Act also includes a process for local governments to take on coastal permitting authority in onshore portions of the coastal zone. Along the Gaviota coast, Santa Barbara County has had that authority since the 1980s through its Coastal Commission certified local coastal program. The Coastal Commission is also one of California's 3 designated coastal management agencies under the Federal Coastal Zone Management Act. This provides the Commission with a unique authority to review federal agency projects and projects requiring federal approval that have the potential to affect coastal resources, regardless of their location. This is a unique law. Rather than establish a geographic jurisdiction, it establishes an effects test. Essentially, any activity that could affect California's coastal resources is subject to review. This includes oil and gas projects in the federal waters of the Santa Barbara Channel, the Outer Continental Shelf, as well as inland areas landward of the coastal zone. The Coastal Zone's Federal Consistency Authority often provides the state of California its only formal means of reviewing federal agency activities affecting coastal resources. It also provides the public with a unique ability to participate in an open meeting and decision-making process for these projects. I bring up this Federal Consistency Authority in particular because it is this authority that allowed the Coastal Commission to review the initial development of the CNRA unit. Next slide, please. The offshore oil and gas field, as Secretary Crowfoot noted, that was held by Exxon for many years and recently sold to Sable. The assets that were sold include 3 offshore platforms in federal waters, Hondo, Heritage, and Harmony, as well as oil, gas, and water pipelines that connect those platforms to shore, the Los Flores Canyon processing facility, and the onshore pipeline extending from that facility along the Gaviota coast and inland. The CNRA unit was first developed in 1976 with construction of platform Hondo, and the mooring of a repurposed oil tanker offshore in federal waters that was used to treat and store oil produced from the platform and loaded onto barges and tankers for transport to out-of-state refineries. These efforts occurred just prior to the Coastal Commission obtaining Federal Consistency Authority, so neither the construction of the platform nor the mooring of the storage and treatment barge were subject to review by any California state agency. However, this changed in 1977 with the federal approval of California's Coastal Management Program. So by the time Exxon pursued further development of the CNRA unit in the 1980s, Coastal Commission review was required for activities in federal waters. In 1983, the Coastal Commission approved construction of additional offshore platforms on the CNRA unit, but rejected Exxon's proposal to continue and expand use of the offshore storage and treatment tanker due to concerns about impacts to the coast and ocean, particularly due to spill risks and air emissions. After several years of delays due to litigation and appeal of the Coastal Commission's decision to the Secretary of Commerce, Exxon revised its proposal in 1988 to include pipelines to shore, processing at the Los Flores Canyon facility, and a marine terminal offshore of El Capitan State Beach. The Coastal Commission approved Exxon's permit application, but it and Santa Barbara County continued to have serious concerns about the transport of oil by tanker and the major spill risks it brought with it. By this time, though, Celeron and the All-American Pipeline Company were developing a pipeline connecting Los Flores Canyon facility to an Exxon refinery in Texas. This is the pipeline you're all familiar with from the 2015 spill. And it was granted a coastal permit in this area by Santa Barbara County in 1987 and constructed shortly after. The other 2 CNRA unit platforms, Heritage and Harmony, were constructed in 1989. And by 1992, they were online and sending oil through the pipeline along the Gaviota coast. At the time, the expectation was that the CNRA unit facilities, the wells, platforms, and pipelines, would be in use for between 25 and 35 years. They've now been in place between 36 and 50 years and have extracted roughly 500 million barrels of oil from the CNRA unit offshore. Sable purchased the CNRA unit facilities, platforms, onshore and offshore pipelines, and processing facility at Los Flores from Exxon in 2024. Next slide, please. Shortly after completion of this purchase, Sable began efforts to install a series of shutoff valves on the onshore pipeline and to address the many sites where the line had corroded and was at risk of rupture. The shutoff valves are large structures installed on the pipeline that also involve a complicated apparatus that sits below ground and in some locations required extensive grading and vegetation removal to install. In addition to 16 of these sites, there are also over 100 locations on the buried pipeline within the coastal zone where Sable determined the pipeline was defective. In response, Sable brought in heavy equipment to excavate substantial areas, either removing and replacing whole sections of pipeline or installing external sleeves and coatings to expand and reinforce it. This work often involved destruction and disruption to sensitive habitat. to create access routes and staging areas, and for the excavations themselves. Some of the excavations extended for roughly 100 feet with a depth of over 10 feet, while others are on steep slopes in protected habitat areas, including federally designated critical habitat for wildlife protected under the Endangered Species Act, or within sensitive stream corridors and wetlands. The timing of much of this work has been very problematic. It's been occurring during the breeding season for the area's federally endangered steelhead and threatened red-legged frog, the nesting season for most bird species, and the time of year when ground disturbance is most likely to result in erosion, scarring, and discharge of sediment into wetlands and watercourses. Sable began this work without receiving new coastal development permits. And when this was brought to the attention of Commission staff in September of last year, and we understood the environmental damage it could result in, we issued a notice of violation to Sable in hopes the work would cease. Because the work did not stop, the Coastal Commission's executive director then began a proceeding for issuance of a cease and desist order, and in early October, and issued that order on November 12th. The order also called for Sable to submit an application for a coastal development permit and to refrain from carrying out additional work on the pipeline until that permit was issued. While Sable did stop onshore work for a time, it refused to seek that permit. Instead, Sable shifted its focus offshore and began preparations to reinforce several sections of the oil and water pipelines that connect the platforms to shore. Despite repeated requests for Sable to apply for and obtain a permit prior to starting this work, Sable again proceeded without a permit, prompting issuance of another notice of violation on February 11th. Shortly after receiving this notice, Sable started work again on its onshore pipeline, still without the permit we had called for. This prompted issuance of a second cease and desist order. The Coastal Commission's by the Coastal Commission's executive director on February 18th. Despite this order, Sable continued its work unabated. I know that many of you are wondering why we're not taking further steps in response to what we consider to be repeated Coastal Act violations. I want to assure you that we've been actively using and pursuing all the tools at our disposal to get Sable to seek Coastal Act authorization before proceeding with further pipeline work. This is the first time in the agency's history that we've had a party blatantly ignore a cease and desist order like this and refuse to submit a permit application. Sable's representatives have told us that they'll only stop if a court makes them, so we've been working with the Attorney General's office for the past month to move in that direction. The situation has been complicated by the County of Santa Barbara Planning Department's position that the work is covered by a permit issued nearly 40 years ago for the original construction of the pipeline. While we strongly disagree with that stance and have started a dispute resolution process with the county to address it, Sable continued working night and day to complete the pipeline work. It's our understanding that the work is largely wrapped up now, with the largest exception being the section in Gaviota State Park, where the work is currently on hold. We're focusing on that area now and on bringing enforcement order to the Commission at its April meeting in Santa Barbara. This would be different from the previous cease and desist orders in that it would be brought to the Commission itself for a decision in a public meeting and could include penalties and mitigation for damage caused by the unpermitted work. Overall, this continues to be an incredibly frustrating situation, and it's made more so because I believe much of the damage to wildlife and habitat that has resulted from the work could have been avoided if Sable had followed what we consider to be the appropriate regulatory process. I know there are a lot of questions as well about restart and the Coastal Commission's role there. We're working hard to evaluate the situation and how best to apply the full range of the Coastal Commission's authority, both state and federal. The situation is still fairly dynamic. As you may have seen earlier this week, it was reported that the federal agencies responsible for regulation of offshore oil will be carrying out an environmental assessment that will include restart, extension of leases on the San Ynez unit, and permits for new wells. We're in the
totally get the intensity of emotions here. We've got a lot to cover, so if you can do your best
This is it.
To let Cassidy finish.
Almost done. Thank you. Appreciate it. We're in the process of coordinating with these agencies to better understand the scope of that effort and its effect on some of the recent decisions. And I expect we'll have more clarity to provide regarding the Coastal Commission's role in Restart at its meeting next month in Santa Barbara. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and appreciate the clarity of discussion of the actions that are being taken, just so people can understand it. Lands Commission has jurisdiction over state waters, and so plays an important role in the offshore pipelines. Over to you, Grace.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. Thank you, Senator Limón and Assemblymember Hart for inviting the State Lands Commission to this event tonight, and thank all of you for coming out and expressing all of your passions. We're definitely wanting to hear from you. As Secretary Crowfoot said, I'm Grace Cotto. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the California State Lands Commission, and I think we can go to the next slide, please. When California became a state way back in 1850, it inherited all of the natural and navigable waterways, tide and submerged lands within its boundaries. The office predating the State Lands Commission was created in 1849 prior to becoming a state and is known as the Surveyor General. The office of the Surveyor General was abolished in 1929 and its responsibilities transferred to the Department of Finance and the Division of State Lands because of malfeasance and controversy surrounding the state's prior management of oil and gas, and because of a desire to create a higher level and more autonomous board, more independent board, for its decisions regarding how state lands are utilized. So that created the State Lands Commission through an act in 1938. We were created as an independent body, or a commission. It consists of 3 members: the Lieutenant Governor, the State Controller, and the Governor's Director of Finance. Public awareness and participation is assured because the Commission makes all of its decisions at properly noticed public meetings. Next slide, please. Oh, we can go to the next slide. My apologies. The Commission acts as a land and resource manager, and we're responsible for approximately 4 million acres of tide and submerged lands and the beds of navigable waters. These lands are often referred to as sovereign or public trust lands. Next slide, please. The Commission plays 2 distinct roles related to oil and gas operations. One is a land manager and one is a regulator. In the land manager role, the Commission has jurisdiction over the state's offshore oil and gas production leases and offshore pipeline leases within state waters. In a regulatory role, the Commission has authority over marine oil terminals and is responsible for the prevention of oil spills on sovereign lands. Next slide, please. At the Santa Ynez unit, the Commission has 4 leases: 2 offshore pipeline leases and a lease for the Elwood Fixed Industrial Pier and 2 mooring buoys. Next slide, please. Recently, as of December 2023, the State Lands Commission authorized amendments to 2 of the offshore pipeline leases and imposed more rigorous inspection schedules exceeding federal regulatory requirements and granted staff more access to additional pipeline inspection and maintenance data. Next slide, please. Commission staff is in receipt of the inspections and maintenance data from Exxon and has received an operator agreement identifying Sable Offshore as the operator and local agent in complying with lease terms for our leases. This is not an assignment for the lease. That would require an entirely separate Commission action at a regularly noticed meeting. Next slide, please. The lease that we have issued does require that all other regulatory authorities and authorizations are received prior to moving forward, or the lessee could be considered in breach of their lease. That concludes my presentation.
Thanks so much, Grace. So just to put a finer point on it, just talk about, the State Lands Commission's actions on this completed or still forthgoing, and what could these folks anticipate by way of like public meetings?
Sure. So the action in terms of the current lease extension have already been completed. That took place in December of 2023. What is still pending before the commission would be a potential assignment to Sable if that application comes before the commission. That will happen at a regularly noticed meeting. We do not have a date set forth for that at this time.
Got it. And not to belabor, but an assignment to Sable means like the State Lands Commission's permission for that company to operate the pipeline?
So currently Sable does have the ability to operate the lines because they have an operator agreement with both POPCO and Exxon for the 2 offshore pipeline leases. So we have accepted Sable as the operator. However, the ultimate responsibility for the leases continues to stay with Exxon.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So I want to invite my colleague Chuck Bonham to join us. Chuck leads the Department of Fish and Wildlife and is charged with protecting natural resources, nature here. And Chuck, you had a pretty big role in responding to the Refugio oil spill in 2015, if I'm remembering that right. You can start talking.
Yeah, that's true, and I'd like to do a couple of things. I'd like to introduce myself, our department, tell you at least 3 specific laws that are part of our authorities that are implicated in this proceeding or these facts. And I also want to share something that's pretty personal. So, my name is Chuck Bonham, and I am the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I'm deeply humbled by the job. I love the job in large part because I love California so much. And I see a similar emotion and just strong citizenship, and I appreciate y'all participating in the conversation today. In a moment, I'd like to introduce Heather Geldart. Within our department is also something called the Office of Oil Spill Prevention and Response. It is your state agency that runs to an oil spill and fights it. God forbid if a spill does happen. So I'd like to ask Heather to come up in a moment. Next slide, please. I was here 10 years ago, and it deeply affected me. I was the state on-scene lead along with OSPR. I met with you, your county supervisors, your local community groups. I saw you on the beach in flip-flops trying to dig up oil to prevent it from going in the ocean. Note to you, please don't do that next time. It is a risk. We have a department office here in Santa Barbara. Our staff are in your schools. We fish these waters. We surf these world-renowned point breaks. We are part of you. What we experienced 10 years ago affected us. We understand the emotion many of you bring today, and we appreciate your advocacy. Our department is old. 150 years. We trace our roots to the state constitution, which created something called the Board of Fish Commissioners. We still do today what our predecessors did then. We tell people how many fish they can catch each year, what they can hunt. Our 500-person strong wildlife officer corps busts the poacher. But today in 2025, we also do so much more than our predecessors could have dreamed about. And it all runs back to the mission, which is projected on the screen. I have a firm rule. I don't read to you what's on a PowerPoint slide. You could condense all those words down to one simple proposition. We view our mission at our department as saving nature for you your children, so on, for all future generations. So when I shift to, next slide please, the specific laws that have a nexus to the Sable pipeline and the dynamics that are playing out, there are three that I mostly want to share with you. As your state wildlife agency, we actually own public lands as well. We own about 1 million acres across this great state, from the highest mountaintop out to our beaches. 750 properties, almost as much as State Parks owns and manages. So one of the first dynamics that's involved is our ownership of lands. Along the coast, we have properties which are primarily protected by conservation easements to save incredibly rare things like the Gaviota tar plant at one of our ecological reserves. But also, if you could remember the map that the Secretary projected and you could follow the pipeline route north as it swings around and heads inland, if you go all the way out to something called the Carrizo Plains, which is a majestic part of the state, kind of that spot where several counties, Kern, San Luis Obispo, Los Angeles, Ventura, come together. We own about 40,000 acres out there. It's called an ecological reserve, the Carrizo Plains. And it's an incredible mosaic of dryland and brush and very diverse, even though it often feels overly arid. That property is where this pipeline crosses, subject to a lawful easement. So our property management is one of the areas that are implicated here in the current dynamic. And there are two other laws we steward which are also implicated. So if you're an individual or you're an entity in California and you project you're going to do a project that could substantially modify a stream bed or a creek or a river or substantially divert water from that waterway, you need to tell us. So it's important to know that this law is really about information. You have to tell us, you notify us. And then we take a look at what you've noticed, and we start a conversation with that applicant. And we determine, looking at the impacts, whether in fact they'll be substantial. And if so, we issue an approval, an agreement. They're called lake and stream bed alteration agreements. And they include the conditions that we're asking the applicant to do to avoid the impacts, minimize the impacts, mitigate any impacts. If the applicant doesn't like it, they can take us to dispute resolution and mediation. So it's a consultative law that requires us to go back and forth with the applicant. In a similar vein, there is something in California called the California Endangered Species Act. If our sister Fish and Game Commission designates an animal or plant as protected and puts it on that list, then, like the law I just described, if you're an applicant, an individual, and an entity, you want to do something, you may harm, impact, it's a euphemism, the law calls it a take, but we're talking about impact or killing, that animal or plant, you need to come to us. You need to submit a permit, and again, we go through the iterative process. We're advising that person or entity, here's how you might avoid the impact entirely. Here's how you might minimize your impact. And if you can't do either of those, here's your responsibility to mitigate. Those are memorialized in a legal instrument. They're called permits, incidental take permits. We've got a few other laws that over time might be implicated here. For example, in the Fish and Game Code, there are prohibitions on people putting pollution and other products into our waterways. But it's primarily that land ownership and then the Lake and Stream Bed Alteration Agreement and the Endangered Species Act permits. So next slide, please. And lo and behold, I've just covered those points. So next slide, please. So this is a quick summary of the procedural posture between our department and the company. So last October in 2024, we learned that construction activities for the pipeline were underway, and we believed that activities were happening on the Carrizo Ecological Reserve, which again, the company has a lawful easement across our property, which predates our ownership. So when we took ownership, we took the easement as well. And once we became aware of that, we sent Sable a letter in October of 24 recommending that they determine whether they need any approvals or permissions from us before they continue any work. And we directed them to consult with us if they intended to continue work on our properties. So by the time we get to a month later in November of 2024, we learned that additional work might have been conducted in or near streams. Remember the law I mentioned a moment ago. And so we sent a notice that work was potentially in violation of that set of laws as well. We call them 1600 agreements. Those are the code numbers in the Fish and Game Code. And we followed our standard practice as we would do with any other individual or entity. So by the time we got to December of 2024, as our practice is, we sent the company a notice of potential violation letter. And what we do in those letters is we describe what we had observed. So we deployed our environmental scientists and our wildlife officers to do the due diligence and gather the facts. And we instructed them to come and discuss with us remedial measures to correct any impact. And we also gave them advice on additional measures they might want to adopt if they were to continue such activities. They responded to us with a letter. We have not replied to that letter. And meanwhile, since about February of this year, including, I'm informed this morning, as of today, we've continued to receive additional notifications from the company that they will be pursuing further work that may substantially affect stream beds and creeks and also on our property. So we've crossed one threshold in that at least the rule of notifying us is being followed, and we're thankful for that. We have much more conversation underway between us and the department as we go through the iterative dialogue about both those laws. So I appreciate y'all. I thank you for being here. I feel like after this we should watch a surf film and like have a party in here. This is a great venue. And I appreciate Assemblymember and Senator you hosting us.
And Chuck, before we bring up Heather, not to put you on the spot, but that CDFW is reviewing Sable's response. Do you have a sense of timing, weeks, months, in terms of getting something back?
Yeah, I do think we're talking about weeks and not months.
Okay.
So I would foresee a response in the next month.
Yeah, and I'll say, the web page that we put up at our agency has that 3 or 4 pager with all of the recent activities, and then we're updating that monthly. So if you want to track, for example, how Chuck's department is following up, then you'll be able to find that on that information sheet. Yep. And I want to invite Heather to come up from the Office of Spill Prevention and Response, as what we know as OSPR.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Heather Geldart. I'm the administrator of the We'll just switch every time. I'm the administrator of the Office of Spill Prevention and Response. I'm a California native, and as Chuck mentioned, the pristine environment is something I've been gone for about 20 years on the East Coast pursuing career and family, and it's been such a joy to bring my children back here and share with them the beautiful environments and the things that I grew up enduring and loving as part of being a California resident. So this is also one of those near and dears. But I am also like Chuck, I'm not going to read from the slide. The main gist of OSPR is that we provide the best achievable protection in preparing for, responding to, and restoring from a spill. As Chuck mentioned, California has established one of the largest spill prevention and response divisions and teams in the country. We work with permitted operators and owners to ensure that they have the financial and operational resources required in case of a spill, and that they maintain operational compliance with our regulations to mitigate those opportunities for a spill. there's two things that we really focus on in our preparedness perspective, and that's the contingency plan, also known as a C plan, and then the certificate of financial responsibility, known as a COFR. The C plan confirms that the resources required for the best achievable protections, such as a response team, known as a spill management team, and an organized spill, an oil spill response organization known as an OSRO, are contracted and on the ready if a spill were to occur. For certificate of financial responsibility, it demonstrates the ability for them to be financially liable for the cost of a spill. And that includes not only the response direct costs, it includes the restoration costs, it includes criminal and civil penalties. The way we determine what a COFR is that we work through a reasonable worst case scenario or a reasonable worst case spill that happens at the largest amount of volume in a pipeline. So it's not the entire pipeline, but it's where the worst can happen. And through that, we derive through a formula how much financial support they have to acquire prior to being able to operate. Next slide. So right now we have 2 pipelines on the onshore facility, 325 and 324, if you're all aware. They both have their own separate C plan, contingency plan, excuse me, and they both have their own certificate of financial responsibility. Those certificates of financial responsibility have been vetted. We did receive a certificate of insurance from Sable, from the INS Group LLC, and that insurance is $101 million of coverage. Within a C plan, there are 7 to 8 criteria that must be met upon submission to be deemed adequate, and then we move into a formal review of that process. Next slide. As you can see in our timeline, the COFR that was submitted by Pacific Pipeline, which is a subsidiary of Sable, was submitted in April of 2024, and it was approved. And then the next pipeline was submitted in October and was also approved. The contingency plan was submitted in April of 2024. Deficiencies were found, but their deficiencies are rather common when it comes to a contingency plan. They are complex, large documents, and they have a cascading impact. If we found one correction that was necessary, it cascades into other parts of the plan, and it also impacts the COFR as well. So once one deficiency is found, it's very typical for it to cascade into secondary or tertiary deficiencies. Some of the questions that we received during the last few days have asked if there is a financial responsibility on Sable if they were to have a spill, and if the responsible party identified for refugio paid. The answer is yes. The Plains America was the owner and operator of the pipelines when refugio occurred, and they paid in full. They paid for the direct cost, the criminal and civil penalties, and the damages cited in the natural resources damage assessment. The one thing we don't track at OSPR is third-party claims. But if you look at the numbers, they were held liable for over, as we said, $100 million to restore the environment and the damages that were occurring. If there were ever to be a situation where the money was not available from the responsible party, we have other funds available to us, both state and federal funds, that we can contribute to make sure that we try to make the environment whole again and cover those costs suffered by the damages of the spill. But in Lemper-Keene Sea-Strand, which is the act that established our office, as well as the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, all responsible parties are liable for the full cost. And the financial situation of the company is not dependent on the insurance that has been established to cover those costs. Another question we received is why the COFR amount, or the amount of worst case spill volume, was decreased. That was because of the actual Assemblymember that was here during refugio, proposed the bill AB 864 that required 20 additional safety valves to be installed on all pipelines moving forward. because Sable installed those 27 safety valves across their pipeline, it actually lowered the amount of oil that would be able to be spilled during an event. Now, the formula for establishing a COFR and the reasonable worst case spill volume is a complex formula, and there's a lot of different facets to it. But it's what is not only spilled, but it's remaining in that pipe. And because those safety valves reduce the amount of oil that can come out of those pipes, it thereby reduced the full amount of volume that can be spilled at any one time. Next slide, please. So then we move into offshore. The offshore plan for Sable, is the subsea pipeline that we look at, which also has its own COFR. The only reason that OSPR actually gets to regulate this pipeline is because the platform is in federal waters. And so we as a state agency, once that hits our state waters, we are able to create regulations around the financial responsibility that the owner has in case of a spill in the marine area. Next slide. So again, the Sable Offshore received their COFR. They submitted the application in April of 2024, and they were approved in September of 2024. One of the things we did do is we asked them to update. So one of the first things they did as a company is they tried to meet their regulatory requirements by submitting a non-operational barrel volume amount. So they originally submitted their request at 1 barrel. We obviously came back to them and said, we need to see you at an operational level so that we can actually determine the full amount of funding needed to cover a spill and to ensure that your contingency plans address the full amount of oil trajected to impact the shores. There was another COFR submitted, but then was again withdrawn because it's with the Las Flores Canyon Treating Facility, which is actually regulated as an above-ground petroleum storage facility and is regulated by the Certified Unified Program Agency, which is a Cal EPA, and they are responsible for putting forth environmental regulations. The C plan was received in 2024. And we also received, they also suffered additional deficiencies within that plan review. But on both plans, on the C plans, they have addressed and resubmitted all of their plans, and we have found no deficiencies in what they have submitted thus far. And I think that's all I have.
So Heather, then it sounds like for OSPR, there's nothing currently outstanding. Okay. I'm going to next introduce Daniel Berlant. He's the state fire marshal. We think about fire marshals as ensuring building safety for fires, but what you might not know about the fire marshal is it has legal responsibility to protect public safety regarding certain pipelines in the state. And you have a team of pipeline engineers and experts, so welcome and talk about your role.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you, everybody, and thank you to both of you for hosting. We've had a lot of conversations over the past year, and I really appreciate, you really challenged us to do better at taking a very complex issue that we have and making that accessible to all of you, all of the steps on our portion of the regulations so that each step of the way you understand. First off, I'll note that for over 20 years I have worked for CAL FIRE, been in your community for many wildfires and have seen the devastation, natural disasters, many of them climate caused or resulted. And so for us, whether it be wildfires, mudslides, or oil spills, we are dedicated to really ensure that we are protecting life and property. And so our role here when it comes to pipelines is focused on prevention. Again, we are a fire prevention focused entity, the Secretary mentioned, and it was a joke at the beginning that I checked the exits. I literally did go to every door. I don't know why, but I made sure that for you and for me that each of those exits weren't blocked. But whether it's a building or whether it's a hazardous pipeline, our job is to make sure that we're addressing public safety. If we can go to the first slide here. So as was mentioned, we do have a role in regulating hazardous liquid pipelines within the state. Again, primarily focused on ensuring public safety and the impacts to fires and other emergencies that spills may cause. Now, we enforce both state and federal regulations here in California, and we do that through inspections, through engineering, mapping, and analysis. Now, it's important to note our jurisdiction covers pipelines, about 5,500 miles of pipelines here in California for lines that start from point A and end in point B, all within the state, and that carry some type of liquid petroleum product like crude oil. So if the line leaves the state or leaves federal waters, it is not our jurisdiction. That follows under PHMSA, the Federal Pipeline Administration. If it carries natural gas, for example, that does not fall under the state fire marshal's office responsibilities. As the Secretary mentioned, while our office has firefighters, battalion chiefs, we have deputy state fire marshals. In this program, we have a very qualified set of team members that are pipeline safety engineers. This is a unique classification within the state that brings engineering knowledge of pipeline design, construction, and operation. They go through extensive training on these topics. They have educational requirements before they come, but they also have enforcement abilities upholding the law, again, both state and federally. And one thing I want to just note, just as Director Bonham did, we too, our staff, live here in the Central Coast. We not only work here, but we live here. We have family, like myself, here in Santa Barbara. We recreate, we live, and so we are just as concerned of ensuring safety as you all are. And so I just want to share that we are charged with making sure that all of our California is protected from fire and other spills. If we can go to the next slide here really quick. So thank you. We're going to take questions at the end, and I know that a lot of people have had the opportunity to provide those. But if I can mention, when the spill happened in 2015, it's important to note it was not under our jurisdiction. It meets the definitions of a federal pipeline. But as part of the consent decree, this was the agreement that the owner of the line entered into, we went and participated, and we assumed responsibility of this line, ensuring that our state requirements that are much more stringent, and I'll talk about the difference between the federal requirements and the state requirements. By us assuming them, we're able to, again, impose our state elements. PHMSA, for example, at the time of the spill, would inspect lines every 5 years. Our requirement is every single year. We also have, besides annual inspections, stricter integrity assessments, hydrostatic pressure testing, immediate corrosion-related repair requirements. So these are all enhanced measures since the 2015 spill occurred. But I have to acknowledge that really the spill highlighted a lot of areas and issues that the regulators ourselves, the federal regulators, have learned from. Again, not just us, but the industry as a whole. And for us here in California, our State Fire Marshal's Office, we have been at the forefront of leading a number of these changes. We quadrupled our staff to make sure that, again, we could inspect on that annual basis, but we passed new rules. Some of them were mentioned already, but I just really want to focus more on one of those, and that is, what we call coastal best available technologies. So we have set additional requirements here in the state of California. Lines that run in the most vulnerable ecosystems, we are now requiring even higher requirements for safety. That includes mandated real-time leak detection, remote-controlled safety shutoffs, all of which help reduce spill volumes and response times. In addition, though, we required a risk analysis that determines and examines the effectiveness of these new technologies and what result, based on the operator's proposal of technologies, what would the flow analysis, if under the worst case a leak did occur, what would happen and where would that spill go, so that we could, again, ensure that they were decreasing, meeting the threshold for a decreased amount of leakage. And it's really important to note as well for us, at any time, if we determine that an operator is not following through with a safety concern of ours, non-compliance of our rules, we have the authority to immediately shut down any of our lines. If we can go to the next slide. And again, please write down your questions because we want to hear them. We want to make sure that we're answering your questions. If you can...
We've done such a good job, actually, just letting folks get the information out. And out of respect to everybody here that's taking their time, let's let Daniel continue. And then let's make sure that you have an opportunity to answer the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the requirements. I've hit on them already. So first off, the consent decree was an agreement entered into in 2020, and that's where it transferred oversight from PHMSA to the State Fire Marshal's Office, ensuring compliance and safety for operational standards. Back to the coastal best available technologies. Again, these are rules for upgraded leak detection and remote controlled valves to reduce spill risk and improve response times. On these two lines in particular, we required 27 new safety valves for rapid shutoff. And the easiest way to explain a shutoff valve and the technology is if you imagine putting a straw in a cup of water and you put your thumb over the straw and pull the straw out of the cup, the water stays in the straw itself. Unlike older, where you don't have a valve, anything that is in the pipeline at the time of shutoff just leaks out. But these immediate shutoff valves, rapid shutoff valves, are the latest technology to ensure that, again, anything in the pipe is able to be held within it. As I mentioned earlier, we perform annual inspections, not just on these lines, but annual inspections on all of the lines that we regulate, again, exceeding the federal requirements. Let's talk about the state waiver. A lot of conversation about what is a state waiver, and really, unfortunately, the name does not apply really what it means. A state waiver is a set of conditions that we impose to meet or exceed specific regulatory requirements for alternative measures. Now, this is very common in the building code. In the building industry, it is often used by builders to use alternative means outside of the regulatory framework, but that meet or exceed the intent of the requirement. So specifically for this line, within that document, because of this type of pipe, because it is an insulated pipe, on its own, it doesn't provide effective corrosion protection. And of course, corrosion is the leader here of leaks that can occur. And so we have imposed in this document, in order for the line to be operated, they must follow 67 additional conditions above and beyond what we require the other lines to follow to ensure that corrosion protection, again, is not only met, but it is exceeded. Part of those 67 conditions include stricter monitoring, inline inspections, repair standards, and frequent corrosion inspections. For example, pipelines are typically checked for corrosion with an inline inspection tool once every 5 years. On this line, the conditions that we have laid out require inline inspections. This is putting what's called a PIG, but a tool that measures and detects any corrosion, require that to be run twice a year for the first couple of years. Again, that is beyond any of the other lines that we have in our state. But our goal with the 67 conditions really is, again, not only to ensure that this line is able to meet our corrosion requirements, corrosion protection requirements, but the goal really is for us to set a standard nationally to get the federal government and other states. In fact, there are many other states that are looking at these conditions as what could be adopted as the newest standard federally as well. And so it's very important for us that these are the right measures to apply. If we can go to the next slide, talk a little bit about some of the actions completed to date from our office. First off, we have already been enforcing the annual inspection. So even as it does not run, we go out and we have been providing annual inspections. Again, previously under PHMSA, it was every 5 years. And it's not uncommon that our engineers are on site twice a year or even beyond that. And we're not just inspecting the line itself. We're not just out there looking to see, do we see a corrosion, but we're reviewing the test standards. We're reviewing the company's training logs, making sure that their operations, their record keeping, their policies are all up to date. And so we come out in person, provide those inspections. Much of the repair work that has been underway, as well as the installation of the valves, we have been monitoring the operator to ensure that as they are constructed, they again are built to our standard. Now, again, just to be upfront, which is probably a main question for many of you, as there's this continued discussion about is this work being permitted or not, all of that will have to be figured out before we're able to sign off that this line could actually be used. And so please understand that at the very end of this process with all of our sister departments here, it will be before we would ever sign off on a pipeline, making sure that each of these departments has agreed that all of the rules have been followed. So if we can go to the next slide and the last slide here. So what happens if we find an issue? Lots of discussion on making sure that all of our operators here in California are held to a high standard. So operators must address any safety concerns as identified in our code. We have regulations that again allow for the quick shutdown capabilities, block valves, and emergencies. Again, back to that thumb over a straw. We will ensure that all repairs, again, are met to our standards. We have done that so far for the work that has been done. But all work must be documented and reviewed. And so again, back to this discussion about the work that's being done, we will be working, and I have to assume that some of it may take a while here to adjudicate. Again, was work done under a permit and does it meet all of the requirements? But that's going to be an important one for us here in the days to come. And so I stress that we must sign off on all of these safety measures before any pipeline is allowed to be used.
Daniel, follow-up question there. I mean, we're obviously hearing the intensity of the concern around the pipeline safety for good reason after the refugio a decade ago. You explained these 67 additional measures that are in place. I know that there was some concern in the fall about, are all of those requirements readily available? Are they transparent? Where can people actually understand better what you're requiring?
Yeah, so all 67 conditions and this, again, document, the state waiver, is posted on our website. Again, we've really been working hard, and again, thank you for challenging us to do better at posting all of our requirements, all of our steps in as explainable. It's very technical, it's very complex, but all of it is available on our website, fire.ca.gov, and I know it's linked onto the CNRA page as well.
Yeah, and I think if we get very specific questions that come out of today's meeting, we'll essentially cross-reference not only on this sort of master FAQ, but also on your website.
Absolutely.
So thanks, and thanks to Deputy Chief Vicky Sakamoto. He's here. Thank you. All right. Next up is Jennifer Lucchesi, and Jennifer leads our Department of Conservation. I mentioned that within our agency we oversee the oil and gas sector, and so a division in Jen's department called CalGem is the entity that oversees that. So Jen, talk about your role on this topic.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. Thank you, Senator and Assemblymember. And thank you all for spending your evening with us. We know that your time is valuable, and it's really important to us that you all are here, and we understand how much of an effort this is, so thank you. Just really quick, I've been in your communities for the past 8 years as part of one of the unanticipated consequences of the 2015 refugio spill. Previous to coming to the Department of Conservation, I worked for the State Lands Commission, and in 2017, Veneco deserted their platform in the Elwood onshore facility and other operations due to their lack of being able to get their oil to market because of line 901, 903, 324, 325 now being shut in. And so I've had real direct experience working with those unanticipated consequences and trying to make these facilities safe and decommissioning them, and then also chasing after the Veneco trustee through various court systems, ensuring that they actually pay for what they did. So with that, as the Secretary mentioned, the Department of Conservation, one of the many things that they do, one of them is regulate the upstream or the production side of the oil and gas operations in the state of California. Through that, CalGEM oversees wells and some of the pipelines and facilities associated with production operations. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Our mission is centered on protecting public health and safety and the environment, while also recognizing the role of oil and gas in this, to meet the state's energy needs in anticipation of our transition to a clean energy future. Next slide, please. The types and sizes of the oil and gas production facilities that CalGEM regulates are quite diverse. They range from smaller facilities in inland oil fields, ranging from hundreds to even thousands of wells across many square miles of operations, to larger concentrated facilities like the Las Flores Canyon processing plant, which is part of the Santa Ynez unit. Regardless of the size or location, we are responsible for and have enforcement authority to hold operators accountable for their safe operations. This includes ensuring operator compliance with requirements for updating incident response plans, pipeline management plans, and storage tank testing that focuses on safe operations and maintenance of these facilities. We are also responsible for implementing bonding and financial assurance requirements to ensure that the state is protected and our public tax-paying monies are protected when these facilities need to be decommissioned at the end of their life. Next slide, please. Regarding the Las Flores Canyon processing plant specifically, CalGEM's jurisdiction is over portions of that operation that are specifically related to oil and gas production, and this includes certain tanks, pipelines, valves, compressors, and other equipment that prepares the crude oil and gas for sale. Next slide, please. So as part of the sale from Exxon to Sable, our team was out in August 2024 doing a preliminary inspection, and we are continuing to engage with Sable to ensure that they will meet all of our requirements under the law for the production portions of the facility, and ensure that they have adequate bonding in favor of the state and the public. So with that, I again thank you for your time this evening. We look forward to your questions and your comments, and that concludes my presentation.
Just to be specific, so it doesn't sound like, are there any outstanding items that you're waiting on from the company, or anything that we can anticipate?
Thank you for that question. Yes, we anticipate issuing a letter to Sable within the next month, outlining the bonding requirements associated with the Las Flores Canyon processing facility.
And a bond is essentially money that a company puts up to be used in case that there's some problem that the state needs to access the money?
That's correct. So in the event Sable is unable to decommission the facilities at the end of their life, that bond is there in favor of the state and the people of California to be able to utilize to safely decommission those facilities.
Got it. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jen. So a lot of us know that California has, believe it or not, 280 state parks, and 3 of them are in close proximity to this proposed restart of the infrastructure. So I want to introduce our state parks director, who leads all of those state parks, Armando Quintero.
Thank you, Wade. Thank you so much for holding this together. It's the honor of a lifetime to be managing your state parks. There's a little over 1.6 million acres of state parklands in California, and state parks has the authority to grant easements for various uses in state parks, and that includes an oil and gas pipeline that may run through a state park. And as you've already heard, and I'm sure you're getting the sense now, there are layers of agencies that work together on the same projects. So when we approve something in the state park, it oftentimes includes multiple departments that you see seated at the table today. And because the Sable pipeline runs through a 4-mile section of Gaviota, it's required that Sable get an easement from state parks. Previously, Sable had a 30-year lease with state parks, but that ran out in 2016. Since then, we have issued individual permits for accessing and and maintaining the pipeline. With Sable planning to restart the project, State Parks has requested a full project proposal to evaluate the request for this project. So we consider applications for a variety of private and public uses on state park lands, as I mentioned. And we also need to consider these uses in the context of general plans that we've put together with the public's input for these state parks. And just a side note, right now, we are revisiting the general plan for Gaviota Refugio and El Capitan state parks. And if you go to those state parks website, you can get information on how you can contribute to what the future of those parks looks like. Pardon me? Oh, sorry about that. No, what I was just saying is that we are just updating the general management plans for Refugio, Gaviota, and El Capitan state parks. And if you go online to the state parks website, you can find out how to get information on that and contribute to that information. There are several steps in the easement application. And first, the state parks evaluates the application, as I previously described. And if the proposed use and duration do not present any conflicts, the application moves into what's called a real property phase. And we work with the applicant to secure the required components such as legal descriptions and the appraisal that meets state standards. And depending on the easement terms, state parks may review and approve the appraisal and other transaction elements before drafting a final easement. And depending on the easement terms, the Department of General Services may also play a role in the approval of that easement. Applicants are responsible for the state's costs associated with the research, evaluation, appraisal, and preparation of the transaction, as well as the fair market value of the easement. Certainly, you've heard everything in terms of the state fire marshal and others talking about the safety requirements and those requirements that protect wildlife and other environmental concerns. If the project is subject to CEQA or NEPA, it would need to comply with those requirements, which does include public notices. State Parks, State Parks evaluates applications within the context of the structure of the state parks, the general planning, programming, and the cultural and natural resources. So again, we work in partnership with the sister agencies that you see at the table, but we have yet to begin work on this.
Yeah, thanks, Armando. Couple follow-up questions. One is, so an easement is basically permission that the state park would be granting the company to operate its pipeline through that 4 miles of Gaviota.
That's correct.
And you mentioned CEQA because we've gotten a lot of questions about the California Environmental Quality Act, which is really understanding what the environmental impacts are and then identifying how you avoid them or minimize them or mitigate them. So I just want to emphasize, you said that you'll have to do you'll essentially have to assess what you need to do under CEQA for that easement.
That's correct, but we have to get the plan from Sable first to see where they're going to be working. And you all saw the map that shows the general line of the pipeline through and by the other state parks.
Got it. So that's and then do you have a general sense of timing on the easement? I mean, it sounds like the company needs to submit the application, but that's probably months away, weeks away? Maybe that's not a fair question for you.
We have to see the application, and then we can tell you honestly.
Okay.
We don't know what kinds of activities will be taking place and how much.
Got it. And then one last thing I'll raise, which is just in the interest of making sure everybody's understanding everything that's happening. There's the back and forth regarding a right of entry for permits to make certain digs on the existing pipeline to verify levels of corrosion, right? So that's a back and forth that's still happening?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And they had set up to come into the park. We said, hey, hang on, we got to get the permits in place first.
Okay, so just those rights of entry are to do these, as I understand it, these digs to determine, corrosion or lack of corrosion, but the easement is really necessary for the pipeline to operate and essentially have permission to reoperate through the park?
That's correct, and also to just access it to do the work.
Okay.
That's right.
All right. Thanks, Armando. All right. We're pretty close to moving into questions, so I want to make sure that the staff, Jordy, if folks have the things that they can write the questions on, I want to make sure we're getting all the questions. All right. We're going to introduce Yvonne West, and Yvonne leads is at the State Water Resources Control Board. This is a government entity that protects the safety and the quality of our water. Yvonne.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here today, and thanks for coming out and sharing your concerns with us. I wanted to let you know that joining me here tonight is Ryan Lodge, our executive officer at the executive officer at your Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, as well as Jane Gray, your board chair from your Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board.
And can you just talk just a second, because those are two regional boards, and you're kind of explain what they do. And
I am going to go into
great.
all the 9 regional boards and the state board and our role as I get into our regulatory role. It sounds more complicated than it is, so I'll try to make it as simple as possible. If you go to the next slide, just generally on a high level, the water boards, both the state board in Sacramento and the regional boards, the 9 regional boards across the state. This is our mission. Really, as you can imagine, by an entity called the water boards, our mission is to preserve and enhance and restore the water of California's waters and your resources. If you go to the next slide, these are the 9 regional boards we were just referencing. And they are essential because they are your local regional board, and they develop and enforce water quality objectives and implement plans to best protect the waters in their jurisdiction. So here, and we're going to get down to this project specifically, the pipelines associated with this project actually run through 2 different regional boards, our Central Coast Regional Board and our Central Valley Regional Board. But really we're focusing on the work and the interaction with the Central Coast Regional Board, because that is where the San Ynez unit and the areas of concern are. Again, the water boards regulate discharge of waste, such as sediment, into the waters that could occur during the pipeline construction. This is a really important distinction in the sense that the water boards don't permit the operation of this pipeline, or what we do is we permit, or we are responsible for ensuring that there aren't discharges to the state waters. So again, the regional boards, in protecting the waters, we have the regional and the state board have authority through 2 laws, the Federal Clean Water Act and the State Port of Cologne Water Quality Control Act. And we use those authorities to protect the water quality. The regional board, like I said, we're focusing on the Central Coast because there's no known regulated activity in the Central Valley project, in the Central Valley Regional Board. But in the Central Coast, very engaged in this issue and these problems that we're seeing. What I want to focus on and talk about is, on the next slide, some of the recent activity that we've seen. So this slide is a timeline of recent regulatory action by the Central Coast Regional Board and Sable's responses to those actions. Again, I want to kind of focus on our regulatory authority and what makes it a little unique, similar to what we heard from, excuse me, what we heard from Fish and Wildlife. Our permits are preemptive. The regional boards and the state boards, we authorize activities. We have a dialogue with project proponents and how they can conduct these activities under applicable permits in a way that protects our water quality. Central Coast Regional Board first became aware of some of the activity and inspected some of these project sites in November of 2024 after receiving reports from concerned citizens about this activity taking place. In December of 2024, the regional board issued both notices for failure to obtain the appropriate permits and directives to Sable to obtain that coverage. Then in January 2025, the Central Coast Water Board issued investigative orders requiring Sable to submit specific information about the projects. On this slide, you also see Sable's responses. They've engaged in a dialogue with us. They have submitted permit applications to perform work in streams for at least one project location, as well as submitted an application for coverage under our statewide permit for stormwater discharges. Additional inspections were also conducted in February of 2025 in response again to additional information and complaints from concerned citizens and also our sister agencies. This was important information, and the regional board was very responsive to these concerns, and getting out into the field was able to gather additional information that they didn't have about these projects. So one thing I really want to focus on is that the importance of engagement of the boards and the importance of engagement of the community in coming to the boards. We are always available and accessible to you if you have information or concerns. And this really plays into allowing us to regulate efficiently and effectively. The water boards will continue this dialogue with Sable to try to understand more about both past and future activities associated with this project. And in doing so, be able to regulate it more efficiently and effectively. We do have enforcement authority tools. I know some of the questions that we received was around what kind of tools the various agencies have, so I just want to take a minute to talk about those tools. You see on this slide use of a number of them, our notices of violations and our directives. We also have authority both administratively and civilly, if necessary, to impose penalties for various violations, require cleanup and restoration where appropriate, and seek injunctive relief, meaning some sort of on-the-ground behavior change. These are all the authorities that we have under both the Clean Water Act and the State Port of Cologne, Water Quality Protection Act. The region and the state also have a lot of authority to inspect, and so we will continue to inspect for compliance with our regulatory requirements at project locations that are subject to our water board regulatory authority. And again, that kind of regulation has only been furthered by being able to have a dialogue with the community and as well as a dialogue with Sable and understanding the extent of the project, what's happening, and engaging in that back and forth so that we can make sure that as it happens, hopefully before it happens, in a way that can protect water quality. And that is a really brief summary of our authority, but focusing on this project, and hopefully that helps provide you some context for the role of water boards and the 9 regional boards throughout the state. So
Yvonne,
thank you.
That's really helpful. Quick follow-up question. So key takeaway for me is you've got a regional board, a local board of folks down here on the Central Coast, and if there are residents that would be concerned about a project's impacts or discharges from a project or impacts on waterways, et cetera, they can reach out directly to staff to lodge a concern or complaint and then sort of spur like investigation or follow-up?
Yeah, they certainly can. The thing about the type of permits that are applicable to this project is generally we have broad permit categories that are called general permits or statewide permits that are adopted with best management practices or constraints on how a broad type of project can be conducted without impacting water quality. There's a public process that leads up to the adoption of those broader permits, but then as individual projects come in this instance, to get coverage under those permits, there might not be a specific public process. So there isn't a specific process on that specific permit. But there is the opportunity, again, to engage with the regional board and express concerns, provide information, and let us know maybe about activity that we might not otherwise be aware of. And the regional board has been amazingly responsive to those concerns and following up proactively, conducting inspections and investigations to determine what exactly is happening on the ground and whether or not it is imposing a threat to the water quality.
Got it. Thanks, Yvonne. Appreciate it. Thank you, Phil. All right. So we worked through an explanation from our 8 agencies, and just for accountability purposes, the first 6 that you heard from are in the agency that I lead, the Natural Resources Agency, and then the water boards are in our sister agency, Cal EPA. So, Jordy, I know you and I, yeah.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, everyone, from the state agencies for doing those presentations. These are very complicated topics, and making these short presentations out of them is extremely impressive. I just want to give you all a round of applause. Thank you so much. And thank you again to all the CNRA staff, the governor's office, and Secretary Crowfoot for all this work. Thank you for sticking with us. Next, we just have a short presentation from the Environmental Defense Center, who were critical in today's convening. Okay, so can I ask, thank you. Can I please just ask that we, just for time's sake, try and keep our cheers to a minimum. I know everyone's excited and I appreciate it, but we all want to get the information and be done in time. So I'm going to welcome up Linda Kropp, who is the Chief Counsel for the EDC and who has been working on environmental issues in our community since 1989. And we will hear from her. Thank you. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you very much. What an incredible crowd. It's great to have this venue available. Thank you to Senator Limón and Assemblymember Hart for making this happen. Thank you to Secretary Crowfoot and everybody. I recognize some of you. Welcome to Santa Barbara. Welcome back. Is Mati Waya in the audience? Okay, we were going to start with a welcome from Mati Waya, the tribal chair of the Coastal Band of the Chumash Nation, but he may not be here. And so I do want to acknowledge that we are on unceded Chumash land, and we need to value and respect the land that we're on, and we need to do everything we can to preserve cultural and natural heritage here. So before I begin, we have a special guest from our community who wants to talk directly to the state as well as to all of you. Please welcome our local Shiro, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who is a champion of fighting the fossil fuel industry, trying to protect the climate and our way of life, a clean and healthy environment. Please welcome Ms. Louis-Dreyfus.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Boy, I have to say, you government officials here have a very complicated, very difficult job, and I appreciate you, and thank you for being here with us today. Thank you. I am here because I'm a resident of Santa Barbara County, and I can smell a rat, and this project is a rat. Here's why there's so much opposition to this pipeline. Nothing brings Californians together like protecting our coast. We know its value, it is priceless. We know it's the engine that drives the state. So whether it's the shipping or fishing industries or the surfing, hiking, and beach combing that make our tourist industry the greatest on earth, or simply the beauty that Californians have always cherished and fought to protect, the coast is a vital part of what makes California, California. And to make it simpler, it is our home. This is my home, and I will certainly fight for my home. The Santa Barbara Channel has suffered 2 of the worst oil spills that we've heard about today in the history of North America. The first in 1969 was so bad that it actually started the modern environmental movement. Millions of gallons of oil spilled for more than a year into our channel from a blown out offshore rig. That was 56 years ago, and we have not forgotten. The second giant spill was just 10 years ago, and we have not forgotten that one either. But just in case you have a little reminder, here's what happened. A dangerously corroded pipeline ruptured right here on our Gaviota coast and despoiled more than 140 miles of coast. Many thousands of acres of shoreline and habitat were devastated, fisheries were closed, livelihoods were upended, and countless dead marine animals washed up on our beaches 10 years ago. The pipeline was crap, and the people responsible and supervising it were irresponsible. Thankfully, the whole decrepit thing was shut down. Now, Sable Oil from Texas is trying to restart the very same dangerously inadequate pipeline that ruptured. And incredibly, they're trying to do it with 0 environmental review and 0 opportunity for public input. That is insane. It makes me furious. I know it makes you furious. I mean, this whole thing should have stopped when the experts hired by the county issued an initial report finding that restarting this pipeline could cause a spill every year and a major rupture every 4 years. It is the same catastrophe waiting to happen all over again. The report also details the dangers of fires and hazardous materials and water contamination and gas release into our ocean and our state parks, our native lands and wilderness, into our air. Folks, it's a ticking time bomb of risks. But Sable says, trust us, it's safe. Well, if it's so safe, then they should have no problem with the state doing a full environmental review of the project. And they should have no problem showing that their plans to the public. They should have no problem showing their plans to the public so we can weigh in. And they have done neither. What have they done? What have they done? They've begun construction work on the project, which you heard about, with no permit, no environmental review, and no transparency. This is illegal. And when a stop work order from the state was issued, they ignored it and kept working. They bulldozed land and dug up creeks, all in defiance of a stop work order. And the state has done nothing to stop or punishment. What is going on here? I'm quite suspicious. I mean, come on. If I violated a stop work order on my own property, I would get arrested. But these guys from Texas get a pass? What? And while Sable brazenly breaks the law, they're also suing you and me as represented by our Coastal Commission. So, effectively, they're suing us while they continue to work illegally. This is not the behavior of a responsible operator. This is the behavior of an incompetent operator. Look, they're leaving. This is the behavior of an incompetent operator trying to grease the wheels of government to restart a project without oversight, a project that has already criminally failed and fouled our seas, which are the very underpinning of our state's enviable, most enviable prosperity. We're not going to let this happen without a fight. The idea, as Mr. Hart said, that it's either economic growth and jobs or a safe and clean channel is wrong. That's a false choice. The long-term prosperity of California is a safe and clean coastline. We entrust stewardship of California's greatest resource to you, the agencies appointed by the people's representatives. What we are asking for today is very straightforward. It's actually quite simple. We are asking that you, the state agencies, enforce the law and follow their own rules for overseeing this project. asking Attorney General Rob Bonta and Secretary of Natural Resources Wade Crowfoot and Governor Gavin Newsom to stand up, do their job, enforce the laws of our great state in the name of the people who elected you to your high office. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you who are sticking around for the rest of this town hall. So before I begin, so I am Linda Kropp, Chief Counsel of the Environmental Defense Center, but speaking here on behalf of our community, we work in a coalition with NGOs, businesses, students. I was going to ask you all to stand, but it's kind of apparent who you are. You're the ones that are still here. We are here today because of the tremendous risk facing our state, as evidenced by the letters from members of the California Congressional Delegation, state legislators, 130 organizations from around the state, as well as the recent action by the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors not to approve the transfer of permits from ExxonMobil to Sable due, thank you. Supervisors Capps and Lee are here in the audience, so thank you. But the reason was, partly due to Sable's lack of financial resources, but also because of Sable's violation of state law. Also, I want to recognize the municipalities in the area that have come out raising concerns and voicing objections, including the cities of Santa Barbara, Carpinteria, Buellton, Goleta, and the Isla Vista Community Services District. This is not a normal project. It involves a defective, corroded pipeline that no one ever thought would be brought back into service. If restarted, this would be the largest oil project in California and the biggest threat to the California coast. Compounding these concerns, we're also not dealing with a normal operator. Sable is a new, under-resourced oil company that has spent, as you see, the past few months blatantly violating numerous state notices of violation and cease and desist orders. And it was interesting to hear from the Coastal Commission that in the entire history of that agency, no one has violated a cease and desist order. This is not acceptable. Sable. So we have two requests today. First, we urge the state to take swift enforcement action. Some of these violations go back to September. We want to see swift enforcement action against Sable's violations. We applaud the Coastal Commission, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and state parks for demanding that Sable comply with the law. However, Sable continues to violate agency notices and orders while causing significant harm to sensitive coastal habitats, major rivers, and small streams, groundwater basins, including some of the county's foremost sources of water supply, as well as world-renowned parks and ecological reserves, including the Gaviota State Park, the Carrizo Plains National Monument, and Arroyo Hondo Preserve, and perhaps most concerningly, a populated suburban area in Buellton. These violations must be addressed immediately because we're here in California, and in California, laws still matter, and no one is above the law. And if Sable is allowed to violate the law and these orders, what message does that send to every other business in California? We cannot have that message out there. So we urge you to work with the State Attorney General to obtain immediate enforcement orders, including injunctions. Second, all agencies must follow legally required procedures, and provide for public participation. So far, there's been no formal public review, no environmental review, and no formal public hearings. So, we want to make sure that state parks holds the line on requiring Sable to apply for a new easement and conduct environmental review and a public process. At the end of the day, we expect, after learning about all the environmental impacts, we hope that state parks will deny the easement because of the risk, not just from the construction work, but the likelihood of another oil spill. And we know what happened in 2015 to state parks. Several state parks had to close. Other public beaches had to close, and it had a tremendous impact on the public that has a right to access our beach and the ocean. We also urge the Coastal Commission to require a coastal development permit prior to restart. And that's required because the existing permit was predicated on the fact that it had an effective cathodic protection system, which is a fancy way of saying a corrosion prevention system, and it doesn't. So the pipeline cannot be restarted unless Sable applies to the Coastal Commission for a new permit, and that would provide for public review and a public hearing. And finally, the state fire marshal is required to conduct environmental review and hold a public hearing before approving a waiver. And this requirement is more important than normal given the corrosion on the pipeline. A waiver is simply not as effective as preventing a spill in the first place. And while we recognize, and we've read the waiver, we haven't read the analysis, we still want the analysis, but while we've read the waiver, it relies heavily on inspections. But the types of inspections don't detect all types of corrosion. And in fact, the inspection data is often inaccurate, and that's what happened. That's what we learned in 2015. The inspection data did not match the data from the actual digs on the pipeline. So, as one pipeline safety expert says, it's almost worse having this waiver because it gives a false sense of security that the pipeline is going to be safe when in fact the inspections may not detect all the corrosion or accurately detect the corrosion. So we asked the fire marshal to do two things. One, withdraw the waiver, conduct environmental review, allow for public and expert input, and second, suspend all review of Sable's application to restart the pipeline until they are in compliance with all state laws. So we thank you for coming here to hear from us. It's been a unique opportunity, and I want to thank the audience that is here. We look to you to protect our coast, our environment, and our economy. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to have Ethan from Assemblymember Hart's office and Gunnar from Assemblymember Hart's office read some of the questions that were submitted.
Step away from the speaker here. All right, thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you to all the speakers. I'm still getting some backdrop here, but so I'm going to start with the question. Yeah, I might step in the crowd, excuse me. I want to start with the question. We're really going to focus on a lot of questions that we've received multiple of, and we definitely won't be able to get to all of the questions that were asked, but again, we'll respond with a fact sheet. So the first one that I'll pose is, which agency testing? Okay, beautiful. So which agency will be responsible for environmental review under CEQA, and when will that happen?
Can you hear me? Yeah, great. So the question, if you haven't heard it, is, as articulated, is which agency is responsible for environmental review under CEQA, and when will it happen? So I invite any of our 8 that actually have to essentially conduct a CEQA assessment or ensure adequacy under CEQA. I think most of us know what CEQA is, but it's a landmark environmental law that I mentioned that requires us to understand the impacts of projects and then identify how to what's called avoid those impacts, minimize those impacts, or mitigate those impacts. So Armando at State Parks, I'm going to turn to you first because I think it sounds like the easement requires a CEQA review.
Sure. What we look for are any critical resources that may be impacted. For example, cultural sites. So Native American sites within the line of the work that's anticipated, as well as protected species of plants, animals, or any other protected environmental condition within the framework of what's being offered to us as a proposal. And we would be talking to our colleagues in the other agencies, or other departments rather, to see how we should go forward with that, because it'll probably take several of us working together.
And Chuck from Fish and Wildlife, you mentioned that the pipeline more inland runs through that Carrizo Plain area, and I know you all have responsibility for enforcing the Endangered Species Act of California. Anything you want to say about environmental review under CEQA, or be a good opportunity to talk about CISA too?
On button works. Okay, so one takeaway I have is the obvious frustration with much of the room that we can't tell you right now today amongst all of us how there'll be consolidated kind of public review and an environmental review process. I hear you. For our department and the Secretary's question about the Carrizo Ecological Reserve, we do have a factual difference of opinion with the company. They do have a prior legal right to cross that property in a 50-foot width. We think they may have done activity outside the 50-foot width. We're in discussions with the company, and everyone gets due process, an open, objective dialogue, which is how we would treat any other business or individual in the state in a similar circumstance. Meanwhile, my recommendation when we leave is that amongst these state agencies, we need to sit down and think about which of us is potentially kind of focused on the broadest picture of the possible project to then determine which of us may take the lead on environmental review. And we owe that description to y'all sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Our next question is, the pipeline is known to be corroded. Will the fire marshal publicly release the analysis on the condition?
Yeah, so the question as articulated is, the pipeline is known to be corroded. Will the state fire marshal publicly release the analysis on corrosion?
What I'll start by answering that as part of any startup, and in this line in particular, all of the corrosion repair would have to occur before the line could ever be back in place. I don't have an answer at the moment, and can take to heart the request of ensuring that it gets made available. The challenge that we have, and just to speak frankly, there are a lot of documents that federally based on different requirements require us to really ensure that what we post and make available goes through a good, thorough legal review. But as I mentioned earlier, and again, very transparent about it, that we've worked hard to make sure that documents are made available to the public. So appreciate the question, and we will definitely work to make sure that gets discussed and decided.
And Daniel, I would just say that we'll take this as a request for a report back, so that on that FAQ that we post on the website, we'll be very clear if and when that document can post publicly.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you. Testing. All right, there we go. Given California's strict environmental and safety standards, doesn't local oil production make more sense than putting it on a large ship and sending it across the ocean?
Can everybody hear the question that's being asked? We don't need to repeat it? Or is it helpful? Okay, you can hear it. So it's a broad question, and I think the crux of the question is, doesn't it make more sense to produce oil locally than to have it produced somewhere else and ship it across the ocean? And I think this gets into this broader question about oil production in California. Right now, as I understand it, about a third of our third of our gasoline consumed in California with the cars that we drive, et cetera, is produced in California. And that amount of production has been going down over time in California. And that's required more imports of oil from other parts of the world. So I think that question is, in essence, a critique of, as I understand it, of this substitution of oil produced in California for oil imported. So that's what I can say, is just acknowledge the critique and invite my colleagues to share any thoughts they have. No, we're good there? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. Why is the Coastal Commission only pursuing further and stricter notices of violations for parts of the pipeline and not the full areas where construction is occurring without permitting? I'll ask that one more time. Why is the Coastal Commission only pursuing further and stricter notices of violations for specific parts of the pipeline and not for the full areas where construction is occurring?
Thanks for the question. I think it's just a fundamental misunderstanding. Those cease and desist orders apply to the entire coastal zone and all the work sites within the coastal zone.
Thank you. The next question is, why permit a new oil pipeline when the state is working to transition to renewable energy?
Hello. I think this question falls in line with the question the Secretary answered 2 questions ago in terms of the overall oil and gas supply and demand policy of the state. And what we can say is that agencies under Secretary Crowfoot's purview, including the California Energy Commission and the California Air Resources Board, are studying those aspects of our overall energy supply and demand consistently, including the 2022 scoping plan by the California Air Resources Board. So I think these types of big, important, critical policy questions are beyond the scope of tonight, although it has a really direct impact on this particular project in light of those policies. It's something that as a state we are trying to grapple with as we move towards our clean energy future.
Yeah, and I'll just share just kind of piggybacking on that. The state has a law that we need to achieve what's called carbon neutrality or net zero in 20 years by 2045. And there's a pathway to get there. It's called the scoping plan. And that scoping plan calls for the drastic reduction of carbon pollution, which requires us to significantly phase down and out the usage of fossil fuel. I think the reality that I think we all recognize is it's a transition, and we're still using a lot of gas. We're still using a lot of fossil fuels, many of us in the cars that we drive. And so what Jen referenced is we're navigating this transition around how to move quickly to clean energy alternatives, yet still provide the fuel that's powering our economy and keeping gas prices, et cetera, affordable. So that's really the transition that we're in. Chuck.
And if I could, Wade, and I am going to share something which may put me at risk with this room, but I ask for your indulgence. This is all happening at the same time across many of our communities in California, where whether you agree or disagree, we also have to start with the proposition that people are involved. They come to these conversations with diverse perspectives. So for our department, on the issues you're concerned about today, we're in the middle of working with a company, insisting rules be followed, consistent with our mission, with an eye towards a better California, having lived through an experience in 2015. At the same time, me personally and our department have worked with your county to permit your first ever renewable wind project. And we're busy across the state onboarding solar and other renewable energies to change the world. It's overwhelming. I know you feel pressure and tensions in your own lives. We're going to get through all this together. We just have to create a space where people can offer their opinions. We can hear from you directly. We can keep trying to do our job on our side to achieve our missions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. This is for Fish and Wildlife and OSPR. The Plains oil spill cost them $870 million. So how is $100 million in insurance sufficient?
Because it's the amount stipulated in a formula created by the California legislature written into law. Because it's an amount generated by a formula written in a statute, and that's the legislative branch.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is this panel in support of utilizing skilled and trained labor along with local hire provisions on this pipeline?
Yeah, great. Good question from probably our residents and organized labor. It's been a long-standing commitment of the state to drive living wages and high workplace standards on large projects. I can say that nobody up here is qualified to figure in on specific requirements for this project or how it impacts labor law, but I want to recognize the spirit of the question and support the efforts to ensure that whatever infrastructure we build gets built under really strong workplace standards and high wages.
Thank you. The next question, test. The next question is there any way to withdraw the waiver for the pipeline that Sable received from the fire marshal pending further analysis?
There we go. About the waiver in general, and I just want to clarify that those 67 conditions don't allow oil to run through the waiver. The waiver is simply the list of things that an operator would have to do in order to meet our requirements. And so I just want to be clear that for our agency, but for all of the sister departments up here, there are all these other steps that would have to be taken in order to actually use it. And so the waiver itself is not the key to turn on the pipe. It is just the instructions to make sure that, again, it meets or exceeds the existing rules that are in place.
Thank you. And back to the...
Just to be straightforward, I think, to be clear, in the state Office of the State Fire Marshal, you all have conducted the analysis, and where you're at is those conditions and the waiver, right, at this point, just to be clear with folks.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yes, so we spent many months reviewing, using our engineers to ensure that we believed all of those 67 conditions met or exceeded the requirements. We then submitted that to the federal government at the end of the year, and they too, with their technical experts, reviewed that document and affirmed that they too believed that those 67 conditions met or exceeded the requirement.
Thank you. And back to the Office of the State Fire Marshal on this one. How can the Office of the State Fire Marshal give Sable the go-ahead when they are in violation of the Coastal Commission's cease and desist orders?
Yeah, and let me just reiterate. Let me just reiterate one more time, even though this microphone's not very good. We will not give the go-ahead to this operator or any operator that does not meet all of our safety requirements and the necessary permits to operate a line and all of the other stops, processing plants, all of the other components as well. And so, again, just to be clear, while we have provided conditions and other elements to be able to safely restart and meet the existing requirements of the plan. Again, it is not the turn-on that they can actually do it. That still has yet to come. We have just laid out all of the steps for our agency of what would be needed, the state waiver being just one of many of those elements, ensuring they're complying with this consent decree, ensuring that they're complying with our coastal best available technologies, and then again, and I just reiterate this, ensuring that they have the permits necessary from all these other sister departments before we would actually allow them to run oil in the line.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the current estimate for the volume of a worst case scenario spill? Where can this information be accessed?
Thank you for the question. So right now, the reasonable worst case scenario for the subsea pipeline is at a volume of 602 barrels. For the inland pipelines, excuse me, reading the wrong one. The marine is actually 1,935 barrels. For the inland, it's 15,269 barrels.
If I can add really quick to this, and it actually goes back to a question that was asked of me earlier. I just went onto our website and verified this. The risk analysis of how the coastal best available technology is installed and their effect on a spill is posted on our website and is available.
And that volume number was in barrels. I believe it's 42 gallons per barrel. The volume estimate was in barrels, and to do the math, it's 42 gallons, I think, per barrel.
Thank you. And I think we have time for about one or two more questions. So, what penalties will be applied to Sable for their blatant disregard of Coastal Commission orders? And if penalties aren't applied, what will stop future companies from disobeying as well?
It's a great question. That's up to our commission to determine, but I will say that there's a penalty amount that accrues per day per violation.
Okay, and one more question. How much bonding was required for decommissioning? Isn't there bonding required for a disaster that could occur as a result of this project?
So I think having both Jennifer respond from CalGEM on the bonding of the Las Flores facility, but then Heather from the OSPR, because it sounds like both entities require some level of financial assurance that if the worst case scenario happens, the company can cover it.
Yes, so from a facility decommissioning side of things, we are still in the process of determining that bonding amount for the decommissioning of the Las Flores Canyon processing plant. That will be expressed in the letter that we send to Sable in the next month. In addition to that, the State Lands Commission, through their leases of the offshore pipelines, also require bonding for decommissioning purposes, and that amount is about $21 million. And I'll pass it to Heather to talk about spill.
Thank you, Jennifer. As Chuck previously discussed, the formula for establishing the reasonable worst case spill volume is there's also a cap on what we're able to require from a certificate of financial responsibility. For a marine pipeline, it's at $300 million, and for an inland onshore pipeline, it's at $100 million. So even though we have those caps, that doesn't preclude us from pursuing any responsible party for the full cost of the incident. The COFR does cover the response costs themselves, and that's what it's indicated. However, there are still civil, criminal claims and the natural resources damage assessment that is pursued to its fullest afterwards. And as I mentioned during the presentation, that was what was conducted during Refugio with planes. The amount of the full cost of the event did exceed their COFR, yet we still pursued the full cost of the incident. And then there's also funding available if the responsible party were to fall short. Additional.
I've been thinking a lot since the beginning of the year about fairness, transparency, rule of law. I think a lot of people broadly and are very concerned about that. It is charged to uphold and how it's working as a parent. Now I can say that very few people here are fully satisfied by this conversation because it's complicated, it's tedious, it's lengthy. Certainly we have heard vociferous and intense opposition to this project. I think if we're being candid, there were a lot of people here tonight that also support the project. And so I anticipated that coming here and doing this wouldn't necessarily satisfy you. But I hope you go away with a better understanding of what each of our entities has to do as a matter of law and the ways that you can actually engage. Last point, we want to take the questions that were asked tonight as well as the questions that we didn't get to, if we didn't get to any questions, and answer those online. So if you Google California Natural Resources Agency and Sable Pipeline, you'll hit the web page that has a monthly update on all of these activities as well as answer to your questions. I guess last point, thank you guys for bringing us down here. I think you insisted that it was important for us to get down here to be able to explain the work that we do directly, and just appreciate you continuing to hold us accountable.
I just briefly, hello, excuse me. Thank you. I just want to briefly say thank you again, too, to everybody who came out tonight and to all of these incredible public servants who came from Sacramento and all over places in the state of California to be here in Santa Barbara at Senator Limon's and I's request to provide this information to you. Yes. This is a really important and consequential project. It has a lot of complexity, as Secretary Crowfoot described. There's a lot of state agencies involved, and I really appreciate the strong message that there needs to be an overriding overview of the environmental impacts of this project. And that's a takeaway that's contributed by your participation here today, your thoughtful comments, your concern, and your engagement. And that's a really significant new element in this conversation that I want to appreciate and thank you for.
Thank you. And I want to echo just the immense gratitude that I have for every single person that has showed up. We all care. Every single one of you that is here cares. Every single person that is sitting here cares. And I believe that this is really critical for our community. Thank you to all of you. This is an issue that we are all committed to continue to work on. You heard from different perspectives. You heard what our agencies are doing, but you also heard that this is complicated. And when we find that there are these issues that our laws don't address, we go back and try to figure out how to best address them. And you have a commitment from all of us to try to figure out what that looks like in the future for the good of the community, for the safety of the community. There were a lot of diverse opinions here today. Not all were able to speak, but we are committed to continue to hear that and to keep working with our community, which is you. So incredible thank you to all. Especially I think our Secretary, Wade Crowfoot, who has helped champion this. The office of our governor, who is here. We have Grant Mack here from our governor's office. And yes, there is more to do. Yes, there is more to do. Yes, we can do better. Yes, we are committed to doing better. Yes, we are committed to doing more. So I think that that's important, but an incredible thank you to everyone and gratitude to all of you for being here today. Thank you.